writer and futurist Alex Steffen describes our civilization this way. Picture a little Earth circling around the sun. About 1 million years ago, a bunch of monkeys fell out of the trees, got a little clever, harnessed fire, invented the printing press, made luggage with wheels on it, and built the society we now live in. Unfortunately, while this society is without a doubt the most prosperous and dynamic the world has ever created, it's got some major flaws. One thing is that if everyone on the planet lived the way we live here in America, it would take 8 and possibly 10 planets like this in order to sustain us all. That is to say that in order to have enough food and water and energy and land for everyone to live like we live here in America, it would require a lot more planets and their resources in order to support it. Unfortunately, we just have one. His point is that we don't know how to build a society that is environmentally sustainable, that is shareable with everyone on the planet, that promotes stability and democracy and human rights, and that is achievable in the time frame that's necessary to make it through the challenges we face. Now, the good news of the 21st century is that more and more people are making their way out of poverty and beginning to live with more economic independence and reach what we would call in this country a middle class status. However, the bad news is that as they rise economically, they are also buying cars and air conditioners and larger homes, and this is adding to the stress on our planet. We have to either figure out how to keep most of the world's population poor and undernourished and without access to adequate water and housing, which is improbable and unethical, or we need to begin to figure out ways to live that are safe and satisfying and sustainable. Now, by sustainable, I mean living in ways that meet our needs now, but that do not compromise future generations to meet their needs. Like the words attributed to the Constitution of the Iroquois Nation, in every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the 7th generation. My friend Connie Barlow says it this way: sustainability is never having to say you're sorry to the future. But let's be honest, there is a lot of what I would call sustainababble out there, or sustainable crap, if I want to use a theological term for it. You can hardly go anywhere anymore without seeing some commercialization of this desire to live sustainably. You can buy sustainable socks, sustainable stuffed animals, sustainable soft drinks and soup and sunblock and sunscreen, and even sustainable spa treatments. Ferrari claims to be a sustainable car company. And much of this is just sustainable sophistry. What's the good of a sustainable stuffed animal if you don't have a sustainable society? It reminds me of the bars of soap that were given to the Jews as they entered the gas chambers during the Holocaust. The Nazis gave the soap as something to hold on to that made them feel like they were going to take a shower when in fact they were heading to their death. I'm not sure if the sustainability socks that I bought are making a difference, but they do make me feel a little better about the way I'm living. The good thing is that the growth of these kinds of products and these kinds of ads show us that people want to do the right thing. Most people would like to be able to feel good about how we live and not feel that we are mistreating Mother Earth and spoiling nature and taking more than our fair share and leaving others with less and with the byproducts and contamination of what we're doing. And that's why chronic consumption is really the sign of a deeper spiritual problem. We are caught in what feels like an inescapable culture of consumption. And I'm as guilty as most. I'm not up here this morning to talk about how, everyone has to do things differently. I'm this shining example, because I'm not. I live in a fairly large house. I have a big green lawn, both in the front and the back of my house, that I water and take care of. I have more of my share of televisions and refrigerators and Apple products and other stuff than most people. I travel by airplane at least 6 to 8 times a year. I drive my car almost everywhere I go. I like taking long hot showers, sometimes without a low-flow shower head. I often do the dishes with running water instead of using the sink as a basin, because it's easier and faster. As much as I want to be responsible to the environment, a good steward, if I'm honest, I only really do what's not too expensive and what's not too inconvenient. How is it, we might ask, that a person like me, who cares about nature deeply and who devotes his life to helping people to live well and to live in ways that go beyond our own self-interest, can be such a big part of the problem? For one thing, the scope of the problem is so overwhelming for most of us, I know it is for me, that it's tempting just not to think about it. Just to go on and just let it lie. Let others deal with it. I stay pretty busy. I allow myself to not really have to think about whether these things really matter and whether my decisions are making a difference. Not to mention that it takes a lot of time and energy first to make the money to get all these things, and then to go out and shop for these things, and then to maintain them once we have them, and then, of course, to try to carve out some time to actually enjoy them. There's not a lot of time left to really think about how to do things differently. So it's much easier to just not think deeply about the way that I'm living or we are living. And then when I do think about it, when I do really get down and have conversations about it, sometimes with you, it's depressing. That's why I titled this sermon, "It Stinks Being Green." Because when I start really thinking about it, and I imagine what this all might be leading to, and I imagine what it says about me and what it says about my life and this country that I love, it's depressing. And it's scary, and it's overwhelming. And so I recycle, and I use the right kind of light bulbs, and I buy sustainable soap. And it makes me feel like I'm trying, and it makes me feel a little less guilty. But here's my point. There are really only 2 kinds of people who do not support the current status quo. The first are dead people. Much to the dismay of our economy, dead people don't buy stuff or use up resources and don't perpetuate chronic consumption. The other kind of people who don't support this way of life are awake people. Awake people do not live in constant pursuit of more and more and more things. Awake people can see that we live in a time and in a country in which the acquisition of material goods is at an all-time high, and yet also at an all-time high is the number of people living with an existential sense of emptiness and intense stress. We live in a culture and in an economy that promotes happiness through the accumulation of more things. I'll never forget how, at the time of this country's worst sadness and deepest fear in recent history, after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, when Americans were in total shock and were prepared to do whatever we could for the good of our nation, our president told us, do you remember what our president told us? Go shopping. I remember how people were prepared to do just about anything at that point to show what America was made of and what Americans were really about and what we really cared about. If we were asked to take public transportation, if we were asked to carpool or to make some real sacrifices to change our reliance on fossil fuels, especially from other countries, people were ready to do it. We were united like we haven't been in living history, and it would have been a national effort. It would have built national pride, and it would have had the potential to transform our country. The point is that moment was a wake-up call. It pulled us out of our routines, and it made us reflective about what kind of world we wanted to live in and what we hoped for the future. It's what ministers do every Sunday up in the pulpit. We're trying to get people to think about their lives and reflect on it, and how do I want to live, and what kind of future do I want to be a part of, and what am I doing so that when we leave these doors, we go out into the world and we live a little bit better, a little bit differently. We had that moment on a national scale, and yet we were just lulled back to sleep. Go back to your shopping. That's what you can do. Instead of reshaping a culture that is unsustainable, and we know it, that is wasteful, and we know it, and that is destructive to life. As the poet William Stafford said, it is important that awake people be awake. The darkness around us is deep. So what would it take? What would it take to wake up and to stay awake? Some people think it would take an enormous environmental catastrophe. That's the only way that Americans will ever make major changes in the way we live and organize our economy. That may be so. But waiting for a catastrophe is not really a plan. Now, it makes sense that thoughtful and caring people like us should look for ways to live so that we are honoring nature and our own place in the family of things. We are part of this earth. We are part of this universe. We were born from the explosion of stars, just like everything else. We are part of the body of life and nature. And just like in our physical bodies, we're cancer are cells of the body, good cells of the body that start to reproduce, over-reproduce. They forget what they're doing, they forget what they're about, and they start reproducing to the point that they start to destroy the body that is theirs, that they're a part of. We are acting like a cancer on the face of the body, our body, the body of nature. And I have a few thoughts, just a few, about what we might do. Let's keep in mind that this church has as part of our vision to be good stewards of the earth, as part of who we say we are and see ourselves being progressively as the years go on. So to that end, I'm really pleased that our green team, as Herb told us a little bit earlier, is putting together panels and educational opportunities, initially on the topic of global warming and then on some other topics. This is an opportunity to take the debate out of the political realm and into the church. We cannot just let politicians and lobbyists, who all have a vested interest, be the ones who are dominating the conversation on these issues. We need to get thoughtful people, religious people, organized people to be thinking about and educating ourselves. And I'm really proud of this church for the work that we're doing, and I hope you'll get involved. And even though this country is divided incredibly along political lines right now on so many issues, when people are asked, what kind of future do you want for yourselves and for your children, there is an enormous amount of agreement. Regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, economic status, occupation, or level of education, Americans across the board want a future in which we can be healthy and safe, and in which our children will grow up hopeful, and in which nature is rebounding and not receding. As one writer put it, no one wants a future that is filled with an endless stream of bad news days. Our disagreement is not really about what kind of future we want, it's about how we can possibly get there and if we can possibly get there. For example, some of the approaches are very controversial. Let's take nuclear energy for a second. Is it green? Is it sustainable? Do you know that the waste and the contamination that is created by each one of us in an entire lifetime, if it were to all come from nuclear energy, the waste and contamination could all fit into a Coke can. That's it. However, the way that we are currently deriving our energy predominantly through fossil fuels is creating an unbelievable amount of carbon into the atmosphere every day and throughout the course of our lives. So the question is, and I'd like to see us have a good conversation in this congregation with some professionals who can let us know, is nuclear energy a significant and viable and sustainable solution for energy in the future? It's really important that we not just have knee-jerk reaction to these things and we really think them through. Another controversy is about genetically modified foods. I've been opposed to them since I heard, this is the first time I heard that they exist. Why? Well, it just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. It's like common sense, gut reaction, intuition. But I mean, it's a hot button issue. There's been an incredible backlash against this new technology among environmentalists, especially environmentalists. But yet one of the promises of genetically modified foods is that they can yield a lot more food per square mile and use a lot less water and much less chemicals in order to produce it. With the planet approaching almost 8 billion people, and with many of them undernourished, I want to hear an authoritative and thoughtful and unpoliticized panel discussion about whether genetically modified foods is an important step and technology that's going to help us to sustain a planet with this many people in a way that's livable. It's a good question. Maybe a terrible idea. I don't know. But I'd like to hear it, and I'd like to be educated on it, and I'd like to be part of that kind of a solution instead of just having a gut reaction against it. Another thing I want to suggest this morning for all of us is something that Sustainable Tulsa is doing. It's a great organization. They're putting on a number of wonderful programs for our community on these issues. One thing that they're doing in 2014, which is new, is that they're giving an environmental tip of the month every month. So for example, this month, January, they've asked folks to just do this one thing for the month and educate yourself and see how it works. And theirs is buy locally. There's a lot of benefits to buying locally grown produce and other products and from locally owned stores and restaurants. A lot of the pollution that's created comes from the transportation of food onto our dinner table. Buying locally gets fresher food, it has less impact on the environment, and it helps us support our local economy. I understand that $1 spent in a chain store or restaurant, it brings in about $4, is passed around and brings in about $4 to the local economy. Whereas when we spend $1 in a locally owned restaurant or store, that gets passed around 15 times and is worth $15 to the local economy. It makes a difference to Tulsa, and it brings us in relationship to the people who are farming and creating businesses right here in the community. So I want to encourage us to follow Sustainable Tulsa's monthly tips. And what I'm going to talk to the Green team about and our editorial board here at the church is to put, let's have an article in either our journal, our monthly journal, or our newsletter that gives people some information and where to find out more about whatever that tip is a month, because this is a religious issue. How we relate to the planet and to the ecosystem and the future that we're passing on to the next generation is a deeply religious and moral question. It is without a doubt one of the fundamental moral issues of our lifetime. Which leads me to my final point this morning, which is about what I'm calling having the wrong complexion for protection. Listen to this. A national study by the United Church of Christ examined the intentional placement of hazardous waste sites, landfills, incinerators, and polluting industries in communities inhabited disproportionately by African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans, Asian and Pacific Islanders, farm workers, and the working poor. The report said that these groups are vulnerable And one of the reasons is because they are seen as being weak and passive citizens who will not fight back against the poisoning of their neighborhoods in fear that it may jeopardize their jobs and their economic survival. I asked in a message I gave a few years ago on this subject, I said to people, one thing that they could do then, I said, follow your trash. When you put it in the garbage underneath your sink or wherever you do, where does it go after that? Follow the trash. See where it goes in this community and see what happens to it. And some people came back to me and said, as I followed the trash, I saw where the neighborhoods in which it gets dumped or where it gets incinerated and how that affects the health of the children in those neighborhoods and how what the statistics say about those kinds of things. And they realized, wow, it does make a difference. What I put in my trash makes a difference to the lives of other people, and it's disproportionate with regard to people who are poorer and also people of color in our community. So these issues are really linked all together. Why is it a religious issue? Because the have-nots or the poor of the world are often blamed for their poverty as a moral failing on their own part. But an honest moral assessment of the environmental situation shows that it is the haves of the world who will be judged by history for our moral failure. Our failure to acknowledge and act upon the economic and environmental inequity that we contribute to and that we take part in. Now, I admit that it is a lot easier for me to stand up here and talk about it than it is to actually do anything about it. I know that the entire subject is huge and it's overwhelming. It can be depressing to think about. But I hope that you leave here today knowing that you're not alone, that collective actions, even a lot of small steps, can add up to making a big difference. And that we have a community here that is committed, at least in principle, and I hope more and more in action, to being a leader with regard to sustainability in our community and in our world. Let us each do our part. Let us stay awake. Let us stay involved so that we can find ourselves on the right side of history, knowing that we did our part in the early part of the 21st century. Let us strive to always remember our place in the family of things. Amen.